But Tom Fitton is here right now. He's the president of the wonderful Judicial Watch. He has a new book called Rights and Freedoms in Peril, an investigative report on the left's attack on America. Tom, how you doing, sir?
Hey, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. We'll get to the book in a minute here, but where's your head at right now when it comes to election integrity?
Well, we had a huge victory last week in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. We had been fighting and leading the way on trying to get the courts to stop the counting of ballots that arrive after Election Day, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with us. So, at least in the Fifth Circuit, and it's the first appellate court to make the finding that you can't be counting ballots that arrive after Election Day. Just to describe it is to really condemn it, isn't it? And federal law sets Election Day, and the court said, let's be sensible here and highlight what Congress is trying to do, and just affect it in the sense that if you're counting ballots in Mississippi, in this specific case, for 5 days, allowing them to come in for 5 days after Election Day, that's outside the law. Illinois, they count for 14 days after Election Day, ballots that come in.
What's the steel man here? That these are ballots that were put in the mailbox before Election Day, or they're overseas ballots for service members? Yeah.
Supposedly, and service members, they get their ballots there on time. We're not talking about that. Yeah. We're talking about ballots that come in that are mailed late. I would submit, potentially, certainly in Illinois, but they're either mailed on Election Day or close to it, and they don't get there in time. And if you want your vote to count, you got to vote by Election Day and make sure your ballot's there. That's not like every state does this. It's 18, 19 states, and they've changed Election Day to election month, and that's not right.
What state does this apply to?
It's the Fifth Circuit, so in this case, Mississippi. Texas, they allow their ballots to come in a day after Election Day. So they may have to change their law.
I'm glad you brought up a win, but last week we went over 2 losses. We've been spending a lot of time on UOCAVA, these overseas citizens being allowed to vote, and the Republicans lost a case in North Carolina and Michigan on this. And the argument from both courts were, too late, you should have brought this up years ago, too late to complain now, and you have no standing, which is very similar to what was done in 2020 with all the election cases. How do Republicans stand up against those 2 problems from the courts?
Well, they can't be late to the game. That's one thing for sure. And it's difficult to get a court to stop a balloting that's already begun, right? Mm-hmm. And to tell, ballots that are, especially in the case of overseas ballots that are likely already in transit, to say they can't be counted. That's just asking, even if it's legally correct, a lot for a court to do in the lawyers say the equitable sense. And, of course, the Supreme Court precedent frowns upon it. But on the other hand, the courts have got to be brave and fearless here. And in 2020, it was, you sue before the election, it's too soon, or after the election, it's too late. And it's frustrating when the courts refuse to deal with the merits, right? In this case, the merits are, whether the system was gamed in a way to get ballots that were otherwise ineligible for voting, and then be told after the fact, you tried and you lost all your cases, which is what the argument was in 2020, where the merits of the issues that certainly were being brought by the Trump campaign were ignored by the courts, and the left pretended they were all adjudicated.
I want to get to your book, Rights and Freedoms in Peril. Give us some examples. I think there's a lot of people who have the frog in the kettle thing, right? And maybe we lose sight, or most people in America lose sight of how far off track we are. What's one issue to you that you think can really snap people out of their perhaps malaise?
Well, to go with your metaphor, we're not the frog in the kettle. We're a frog who is thrown into boiling water outright. And this is why people are reacting. I think they ought to react. Rights and freedoms include your right to vote. And the civil rights issue of our time is voter fraud. and combating it. And the left has zero interest in it, want to promote it, in my view. And I don't think they just support, stealing elections. I don't think they like elections. And we're kind of seeing that even to this day with, Kamala Harris being installed as head of the, as head of the ticket without a single vote in a way that I think raises substantial legal issues. But then, of course, you have the basics, like your right to speak, your First Amendment rights, your right to free speech. They don't want that. And they've engaged in a massive effort that I don't think we've ever seen before in American history to suppress the free speech rights of virtually every conservative. And it's not just Trump who gets suppressed when his stuff is taken down, as they did. It's everyone who views his content and wants his content. And then, of course, you have the lawfare, where they're trying to literally jail their political opponents, not only Trump, but senior party leaders across the swing states, other innocent Americans who were doing what they're able to do under the law to challenge an election. Never seen before that type of activity, certainly in the modern era. And it's banana republic type activity as well. And, on top of that, the left doesn't like the institutions that prevent that from happening, or at least ought to. That's why they want to pack the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. That's why they're attacking the fundamental rule of law and the institutions that are supposed to guard against these abuses, namely the Constitution. That's why they want to amend the Constitution. They want to amend the First Amendment to make it easier for the government to jail you over speech they don't like.
What do they want to say? What do they want to change the First Amendment to?
Oh, they want to be able to regulate political speech outright. And they don't like the idea that the Supreme Court has ruled that people have a right to free speech, especially when it comes to political speech and campaigns. And they want to change the amendment so that they can regulate the content of political speech in the context of campaigns.
So in their perfect dystopian world, what would that even look like if they had their druthers?
It would be restricting severely the right to support a candidate of your choice and throw you in jail if you give them $1 more than they decide that you can give them. It might even result in no private support for political candidates, and that the government can only support political candidates. Yeah, and then on top of everything else, we have this racialism, this racism that the left has embraced, an utter rejection of the 14th Amendment idea that we all get equal protection under the law. I mean, they are embracing reparations, which is, I'm going to give money to someone based on the color of their skin simply because of their ancestry and what may or may not have happened to them. I mean, we've got a civil rights lawsuit, a civil rights class action lawsuit in Evanston, Illinois, where they have their first reparations case that they're promoting, $25,000. And the key eligibility, because otherwise many would be able to apply for it, is the color of the person's skin. They have to be black. Yep. So when they promote it and then go into the military academies and tell people that tell the rising leadership of our military that the country they're swearing to defend is really indefensible, mm-hmm. and trying to stand up our rising military leadership against the people and nation they're supposed to defend, this is sort of crisis scenarios. And my concern is that too many Republicans just don't see this as a crisis. And too many conservatives who are elected, don't really want to do anything about it. In fact, the question everyone asks the Kamala Harris, why haven't you done anything about it in the last 3.5 years, right? Well, that question can be asked in a Republican-controlled House. All these awful things that have been happening, you're all running against. You all realize you all fully funded multiple occasions in the last 2 years, right?
Yep. That's why we need Elon there as well. It's gives some courage. By the way, on reparations, Evansdale, Illinois, that's peanuts. Was it 25,000? Kamala, San Francisco is looking at $5 million per black person.
Yeah, well, this is the first one, right? Sure. And they're actually looking very carefully at our lawsuit because they see it as a mortal threat to their programs nationally if it does.
Which they want to be way bigger. I went on a little daydreaming session yesterday about what would happen if Kamala wins and what the next 4 years of her presidency would look like. What is, to you, what's one thing that stands out of the biggest problem?
Well, these continued attacks on our institutions. I don't think there's much new in the way of politics. You can usually guess what's going to happen in the future, unlike with the stock market, based on what happened in the past when it comes to politics. And the left wants to change the Supreme Court, pack it. They end the filibuster, which would result in many, assuming they have the votes in the Senate to do it, which would result in things like, do you want D.C. and Puerto Rico to be states, and they get 4 senators for the left as a result? You're going to have programs pushed forward to ensure that the invaders under the Biden-Harris border invasion don't get deported and are counted in the next census and are essentially change the political makeup of the country to the benefit of the left. So there'll be amnesty for the illegals, or efforts to either make it give them amnesty through Congress or through executive fiat through her. An embrace of this reparations agenda, the kind of heralding further the destruction of the country through racial division and strife. It won't be pleasant. And you know what? A lot of that isn't going to stop even if Trump is elected. I mean, Trump is obviously seen as a hurdle to be overcome. But like I said, a hurdle to be overcome doesn't mean they won't stop. So they're going to still try to jail him. They're going to still push reparations. They're going to oppose efforts to deport. They're going to continue to attack the Supreme Court. So the battle will change from, patriot perspectives and conservative perspectives, but the issues won't, because the left isn't going to give up. You can trust the communists to be communists. They're not going to stop.
I think if Trump wins, I think there'll be a 4-year campaign of just straight sabotage. I've likened it in the style of the French Resistance when the Nazis took over, because that's how the leftists will view it, that the Nazis have taken over and we need to sabotage the country. How do you think the left reacts, maybe immediately and or the next 4 years, if Trump wins?
Well, I hope cooler heads prevail. I mean, last time, if Trump, quote, won, and I read about it in the New York Times, they were planning threats of civil war in order to stop him from rising to power and to change the congressional certification process to reject him. I think there'll be extensive pressure in that regard. Antifa and that type will be unleashed again on our cities. The question is, how are local Democratic mayors going to deal with it? Are they going to allow it to happen again? And is the public going to tolerate it? Because none of this rioting, but I don't want to scare anyone, but rioting only takes place, to be clear, because of acquiescence by the police and the politicians that run the police.
Yeah.
So if it happens, so people should know, if it happens, it's on purpose and it's allowed to happen. And I'm not talking about, you don't even need to call out the National Guard. All you need is a competent police response and rioting stops.
Yeah, unlike Tim Walz and Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, all that. Perfect example of the opposite. Yeah, really good point. Tom, what do you want people to get away from reading your book?
There's a way forward, right? And the way forward is Judicial Watch. Our rights and freedoms in peril, but we've got to take this aggressive approach, either through litigation and education, and understand what the core problems are. I mean, we aren't arguing about tax rates. We're arguing about whether we're going to have a constitutional republic or not. And I tell you, and I know it might be self-interested, but you got to read this book before the election, because it talks about how elections are going to be handled. It talks about these core issues and why they are important. And the more you know going into the election, the better off you are.
Indeed. Rights and Freedoms in Peril, an investigative report on the left's attack on America. Rights and Freedoms in Peril by Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch, judicialwatch.org. Tom, keep up the wonderful work. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.